All right. Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. Let me know in the chat to make sure that you can. Welcome. So today we're going to do a quick training on how to optimize your stress mindset. I know this is something that's very top of mind for a lot of individuals right now. So hopefully this will help. I know a lot of you watch this in the recording, so that will be available to you once the live is over. And I'll make sure to share links here in the chat. And so let's get started. Okay, so I'm going to show you just an image here. And so obviously here we have two milkshakes. And so if you are joining live, feel free to comment along. Do these milkshakes look the same to you? So what if I told you that one milkshake has significantly more calories than the other? So one milkshake is more of like a diet milkshake, and one milkshake is more of a indulgent milkshake. You probably would feel a little bit differently about the milkshakes. So there was a study done at Stanford specifically on these milkshakes. And what they found was really interesting. And I think this will really help us understand the foundation of mindset and exactly how deep mindset can go. So, in the study, they gave the participants two milkshakes that looked identical, just like these two milkshakes. And they told them one milkshake is a high calorie milkshake, one milkshake is a low calorie milkshake. The participants were equal and they ingested their milkshakes. And then the researchers actually took blood samples, which is fairly unusual still in psychological studies. And that's what makes this so interesting. And so, in the group that consumed that like 600 calorie milkshake, they found that that particular group had very low ghrelin levels. And some of you might know that ghrelin is what we consider the hunger hormone. So it's the hormone that the body releases to tell us that we are hungry and that we should eat, or that we should eat more. Yeah. And so when ghrelin is low, it means that we're perceiving ourselves to not be hungry. And so they did the same thing with the participant group that was told that they received a low calorie milkshake, that like something like 100-calorie milkshake. And what they found is that those individuals had high ghrelin levels in comparison to the other group. So their minds and their bodies were essentially telling them, you are hungry, please eat more. And what's really the most interesting about this study is that both milkshakes were exactly the same. So we actually know that the milkshakes were matched in calories. They both had about 300 calories. And the only difference in this entire study was what the participants were told about the milkshakes. So, what they believed about the milkshake is what caused those ghrelin levels to either be high or low. And I really wanted to start out with this study, and I talk about this study a lot because I really love it, because it really showcases to us that mindset effects or belief effects are much stronger than we previously thought. They not only impact our minds, but they also impact our bodies. So before we go on, I'm going to share one more study with you that's more relevant to this webinar because this is not a webinar about milkshakes. Let's define mindsets. So mindsets are ways of viewing reality that shape what we expect, what we understand, and what we want to do. All right. So here I'm going to share a study that is going to be more relevant to this mindset or to this webinar. And it's about stress. So, most of you that came here probably are thinking about stress, wanting to learn more about it, maybe wanting to manage it a little bit. And so, if you are attending live, or even if you're attending after the recording, let me know in the chat if you think stress is harmful to our bodies. Like, if being under quite a bit of stress is typically going to cause some type of physical damage to us. And so let me know yes or no. And so most of the time when I ask this question, people do say, yes, stress is harmful to us, which makes a lot of sense because all the physicians, psychologists, media have told us that stress is bad for us, that essentially stress is trying to kill us. We see it all the time in news, probably even on LinkedIn, on Twitter, all of the health posts. Stress is the number one killer, things like that. But what's interesting is that the research shows us that stress is quite a bit more nuanced than that. And so we know that from another study at Stanford, again, that what we think about stress is actually really important. And so let me see here. So I'm going to tell you about this other study. So in this study, they took individuals from a financial institution, so from a bank, employees at a large bank. And what they did is that they put them into three groups. There was the stress is debilitating group, the stress is enhancing group, and the control group. And so in the stress is debilitating group, the employees watched videos that told them that stress was harmful, that stress causes illness, and it makes them make mistakes at work. And so in the stress is enhancing group, the employees watched videos that portrayed stress as useful, as improving immunity, creativity, and work quality under pressure. And in the control group, the employees didn't watch any videos at all. So they just kind of sat there, I guess. And so after a week, the researchers discovered that the individuals still held those beliefs. So this is important because we know that even just from a few videos, individuals will continue to hold those beliefs even after a week. So the people who were in the stress is debilitating group still thought that stress was debilitating, and the people in the stress is enhancing group still thought stress was enhancing. And they further went with the study, and what they did is that they had these individuals perform a task. So the task that they were asked to do in the research study was public speaking. So often kind of a stress-inducing task for a lot of people. And what they did was that they actually measured cortisol responses in this public speaking task. And they found that in the stress is enhancing mindset group, they had more beneficial responses to the stress of public speaking. And they were actually even more open to feedback in their public speaking task, which is really important for improvement, as we all know. So again, here we have a significant mindset study, and this is very relevant to stress. And it showcases to us that mindsets, essentially what we believe about things in a consistent way, has a significant response on our physical capacity to handle stress. And what we see here is that in these studies, overall, the stress is enhancing group performed quite a bit better on performance tasks. You do see here that everyone kind of experienced a benefit in a negative health symptoms, which sometimes can happen in psychological studies, just kind of having more awareness about our health as we participate in the study, and also interacting with the psychologist running the study can have some benefit. And here you can see that work performance increased in the stresses enhancing group the most, and that avoidance of tasks decreased the most in the stresses enhancing group. Okay, so one last piece of research here that I think will be really important is that we also know that mindsets are contagious. So, in psychology, we've long known that emotions are incredibly contagious. This is something that you've probably noticed in your everyday life when you spend some time with an individual that's feeling like fairly low, then you typically feel lower and less energetic after spending time with them. And if you spend time with someone that's feeling a lot of positive emotion, you typically feel a little bit more uplifted after spending time with them as well. But it's not just emotions that are contagious, it's also mindsets. So Oftentimes, we know that leaders are actually really able to influence the mindsets of their teams by holding a strong mindset themselves. And so we need to remember that teams are considered to be ecosystems. So essentially, no team member stands alone, and a team member with a helpful mindset will bolster the ecosystem, while a team member with an unhelpful mindset will diminish the ecosystem. So during these times of stress, individuals who are utilizing their stress and kind of accepting the situation and not kind of putting their stressful emotions on other people will bolster this ecosystem, while individuals that uh, feel like they need to kind of share their stress in a negative way with others might diminish the ecosystem of the team. And so we need to consider that the contagion effect of mindset impacts our entire team. And unfortunately, we know from psychology that negative emotions are more contagious than positive ones. So, specifically during these times, we know that as we spend more time with individuals who are experiencing high amounts of negative emotion, it's actually quite difficult for us to resist that contagion effect because we are human, we are very social creatures. And so I did want to illustrate that on this particular study, the mindset that was studied was growth versus fixed mindset. And so this is often not talked about, but growth and fixed mindsets can also be related to stress as well. So when we feel like we don't have kind of agency over our lives or that we have little control, that often makes us feel more stressed. So lack of control is very much associated with higher stress levels. So individuals who kind of inhabit the space of the growth mindset are able to consider that they can always improve their skills and that they are not static. And individuals who have a fixed mindset typically find that they think that skills are static, that maybe things happen based on luck, things like that. And that can actually be a bit more stressful, which is sometimes a little bit counterintuitive because sometimes we think taking kind of ownership, like more ownership over our skills and our lives can be stressful, but it's actually the other way around, taking the ownership, finding that we have agency over our lives and our skills typically makes us feel better and makes us feel kind of more in control over our own lives and makes us feel less stressed. Okay, so I'm going to use some more specific examples here and transition a little bit more into the business world because I know that's where most of you live and not necessarily in the research world. Okay, so what does this really mean for our teams, our organizations? And what does it mean to have stresses contagious mindset, stresses debilitating mindset? And how does this like transfer to the individual level? Like how can we actually make the change that needs to happen to create a more stress of is enhancing mindset? Because I know that most people, once they hear these studies, they're fairly on board. They realize that we need to kind of shift mindsets and we need to create more helpful mindsets versus harmful ones. But a lot of the questions I get is often like, how? Like, how do I do this? Like, what is the actual process? And I think this is often something that's really lacking in psychology is that typically in most cases when we present research or when we present theories, psychology is fairly intuitive. Like we all have human minds, we all interact with others. We have this experience and we know that this is true. This like we've felt this ourselves. But the transition from knowing to actually embodying and integrating something is very lacking and it can be kind of almost like a mystery that nobody talks about. So I'm going to go more into the details, more into an individual case so that we can understand this a little bit better and hopefully apply this to ourselves. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a story here. And the reason I'm going to do this is because our brains learn best with stories. This is probably, if you don't retain anything from this webinar, this is maybe the only thing you'll retain. So this is going to be a client story. I've coached probably over like 300 clients in the tech industry just in the past 2 years. And this example is like a compilation of various clients. My work is highly confidential, so I'm not going to share anything that would incriminate anyone. But this particular client, or this kind of example client that I'm going to use, he had a job at a large tech company, managerial position. He managed engineering teams, and I know some of you can definitely relate to that. And so the role paid very well, but the issue was that he was constantly overworking and highly stressed, and he had the sensation that he like couldn't keep up the way he was doing things. So in this particular organization, employees are expected to do an incredible amount of writing. And some of you might know what organization this is. And this was extremely time consuming for him. So every time my client needed to write something, he would procrastinate for days and then spend weeks writing just like one single document. And this is a highly intelligent and capable individual otherwise. The issue is that he had extremely perfectionistic tendencies that led him to feel high amounts of anxiety and stress any time he needed to produce some type of work in relation to writing. So because he felt so anxious about the success of his work, he would avoid doing the work until he could no longer avoid it. And then he would just cram a bunch of work into a very short period of time. And so, because he had this very impossible standard in his mind, it created a lot of stress in his life, and it created a very poor stress mindset for him. And so, he essentially believed that success was not within his control. And remember what I said earlier is that the feeling that we're in control is extremely important for performance and stress. And so this is actually one of the biggest problems I see in the corporate world is that in order to create sustainable performance, sustainable success and growth in teams, we need to create a sensation of control for our team members because the human mind really, really dislikes not feeling a perception of control. And this is actually based on quite an old psychological concept that has a lot of research behind it. And that is called oops, I have my slides out of order here. Okay, looks like we don't have a slide for that. So just follow along. Anyways, so this is an old psychological concept, super well researched. It's called locus of control. And locus of control essentially exists on a spectrum. And so on one side, you have internal locus of control. On the other side, you have external locus of control. So individuals who have a internal locus of control believe that they can make things happen in the world, like they have agency, they have control over the world. And people with an external locus of control, they attribute success or failure to outside of themselves. So again, it's a little bit similar to kind of that growth and fixed mindsets, but it's very much based on like how much agency you think you have over the world. And so for the highest motivation and performance, we want people to have a high internal locus of control. And we want them to feel like that they have a lot of success, a lot of control over their success or failure. So what we did here is that with this particular client is that we wanted to change his ability to control his performance and his work. And what we did is that we essentially created this concept called B minus work. So instead of trying to strive for writing a document that would have this like A plus perfectionistic level, that really was never achievable because typically what perfectionists will do is that even if they even if they like have the experience of achieving that bar that they set in their minds, they typically will raise the bar so they never actually get to that perfection. And so we wanted to change that because if you are consistently raising the bar and never allowing yourself to have a sense of accomplishment, then that can make you feel very out of control. And what we wanted him to do is to have control over his work. So we essentially made the goal for him to do like a fairly, maybe even like below average writing job in his writing tasks. And what's interesting is that this allowed him, once he shifted that mindset, this allowed him to write significantly faster. And he actually started to enjoy the writing because he felt like accomplished and that he could kind of set out to do that task and then he would do it, which increased his internal locus of control. And so this is just one small example on how we can change the way we view things in order to diminish our stress and to increase our performance, which is essentially what mindset is about. And so I want to talk a little bit about kind of a more all encompassing idea here is that when it comes down to performance and to stress, what's really important is how much we judge ourselves. And so I often say that my highest performing clients, the individuals that I meet that just are like, wow, like how do you get all of that done in the day? And like, it's amazing. They don't judge themselves. Like, they have no self-criticism. It's honestly amazing to me, and it's so interesting because I'm able to meet with clients, and I kind of see them back to back, and, like, I'm able to kind of compare and contrast mindsets, and judgment is the biggest productivity killer ever. And so when you're looking at your day, when you're looking at your goals, when you're kind of self-assessing, judgment is going to hold you back. And judgment is going to stress you out more. Creating that criticism of yourself is going to create a major stress burden. Oftentimes, I tell people it's almost like living life with like a 40-pound pack that they're carrying around while everyone else isn't carrying it. It's like having someone follow you around and like randomly insult you throughout the day. Of course, that would be stressful. Like if you externalized your judgment into like another self or another person outside of yourself, then and if you consider that they could like follow you around to your meetings, to your work, and they actually said the things that you say to yourself in your mind that are critical, how stressful would that be? Like, how stressful, like, would it be to have that criticism? And sometimes we don't notice it because it's ourselves, but if you consider that this was another human following you around, telling you all of those negative things, that's gonna weigh on you. That is extremely psychologically damaging and stressful to your mind. And so when it comes to really shifting your stress mindset, one of the most important things that I really hope you take away from this is to work on your self criticism, work on your judgment. And what you want is you want to shift it into curiosity. And so, maybe you didn't get a task done in the time that you wanted to get done. And you consider, why was that the case? Like, why did I do that? Like, assume that you have a good reason for doing everything. Give yourself the benefit of the doubt. And that's the way forward because actually judgment, we know, blocks behavior change. So if you're trying to overcome things like procrastination or like a low motivation state, judgment is actually going to block your progress. Although a lot of people think that if they can kind of judge themselves enough, they can get themselves to change. That is not the case. More judgment isn't going to create the change you want. It's actually diminishing the judgment is going to create that space of curiosity that can actually facilitate real change. Okay, so I actually just inserted this morning because I really wanted to talk about this with you all. And there's my internal locus of control slide, if anybody wants to see it. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about motivation and why this happens where when we talked about the client that was having kind of perfectionistic standards and he was having a really hard time with motivation versus when he lowered his standards, then he had a pretty easy time with motivation. Like, why would this happen? And so, when we're talking about motivation, we're often talking about the neurotransmitter most commonly associated with motivation. And that's one most of you have heard about, and that's dopamine. So, dopamine is actually released in response to things that we want to achieve. And some people think it's like a pleasure chemical, but in actuality, it's also released anytime we subjectively think we are heading in the right direction. And so note here the word subjectively. So whenever you hear the word subjectively in psychology, you know that mindset is involved. And so the more dopamine we have in our minds, the more we are willing to continue down a path. And low dopamine equals low motivation and unwillingness to pursue goals, while high dopamine or moderate levels of dopamine is the willingness to pursue goals with high motivation. And interestingly, dopamine is actually modulated by perceived reward and perceived effort. Again, note the word perceived. And whenever we have a word like perceived, we know that mindset is involved. So dopamine is subjective and it can actually be applied to any goal. And this is the main mechanism behind goals that we can control versus goals that we can't control. If you consider that when goals that are out of our control are high effort and low reward, it makes sense why we would not be motivated to achieve them. So consider maybe a member of your organization. Maybe they have a metric that they need to reach, but they have no obvious reward for this. Many of you might kind of be empathetic to the situation. So there's no obvious reward. Maybe like there's an ambiguous promotion or bonus, maybe not, but there's no guarantee. Additionally, maybe this metric they need to reach requires high effort. So of course, they would feel unmotivated. This is a perfect equation for lack of motivation. And remember, dopamine does function somewhat like an equation. As perceived reward goes up and perceived effort goes down, high motivation ensues. As perceived effort goes up and perceived reward goes down, low motivation ensues. And what I find that's so fascinating is that a lot of us will judge ourselves for this. So going back to the judgment. So when we have low motivation states, we often think that we can kind of like judge ourselves into a high motivation state. But the issue is that we're not perceiving high reward and we're perceiving high effort. And of course, we wouldn't be motivated. That's just not how the human brain works. And judging yourself on something that's so inherent in kind of our biology and our neurobiology is not going to be the way to create higher states of motivation. It's just mostly going to make you feel bad and make you more stressed and even more susceptible to burnout. Okay, so let's see, we're almost out of time here. I don't want to keep you all too long. Okay, so let me just talk a little bit more about what this might mean in the business setting. So, we know that mindsets are contagious and they significantly impact performance. So, with a poor mindset around stress and success, we procrastinate and avoid performing the tasks that are important. So, fearing failure or rejection leads us to perform worse and it makes us more stressed. We can bypass this by regaining our control over failure and decreasing our perceived reward. So, improving utilizing stress makes us perform worse. Improperly utilizing stress makes us perform worse as well. So, if we think feeling stress is going to make us make more mistakes, then actually it leads us to perform worse and we make more mistakes. So essentially it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And you'll notice that a lot of mindsets are self-fulfilling prophecies. So you've probably heard that expression kind of like it's a limiting mindset. So if you think your stress is very bad for you and you should completely avoid it, then that might be a limiting mindset around stress. Because, yes, obviously, stress isn't always good for us, but stress isn't always bad for us either. And assuming that it is bad for us actually creates more stress and it makes it more harmful. So we need to remember that stress is trying to help us and it's actually trying to improve our performance because it signifies we are engaging in a task that is important to us. Because we actually know that we do not feel stress over the things we do not care about. So you can probably kind of think about something you don't care about and imagine that, like, yeah, some people might feel stress about that, but you don't because you don't really care about it. So now that we know that mindsets impact business performance in a significant manner, how do we break down the mindset creation process to create more optimal mindsets for our teams and ourselves? We need to understand that in many ways, mindsets are automatic thoughts and interpretations. And one way we form automatic thoughts is through repetition. So the thoughts we think are the ones that we're going to think in the future. In neuroscience, you've probably heard the term what fires together wires together. So that indicates that any neurons that fire together, so thoughts, are the ones that will wire together to create networks that are more likely to replicate those thoughts in the future. So this is an opportunity to change how you think about stress, how you think about mindsets, how you think about interactions with other individuals, even. We so often focus on stress being a problem, stress being something we want to get rid of. And essentially, we create a strategy of avoidance. And we even get stuck in kind of like these types of scenarios in which we're trying to achieve things that are actually not optimal for us. So, in the case of perfectionism, we think that perfectionism is helping us, and we think that it's helping us achieve things more. But in actuality, we know that individuals that have perfectionistic mindsets actually achieve less. Again, with judgment, we think that judgment is helping us and it's protecting us. And if we judge more, we'll achieve more. But in actuality, the judgment is holding us back and it's making us more stressed. So we really need to consider kind of some of our core beliefs, our core mindsets of how we view things, and if they're actually helping us or harming us. Because at the end of the day, we really only care about the mindsets that are helping us. And as long as they are improving our quality of life, they're improving our interactions with other human beings, then that has a synergistic effect on not just on ourselves, but on others around us as well. All right, so I know we're a little bit over now, so thank you if you stayed to the end. What I wanted to do as well here is I actually wanted to offer something to you all. If you just stick around just like for one more minute, let me get you the link here. Let me see here. So I'm going to offer you all just like a quick 30-minute call if you're interested in talking about your own mindset or like your team mindset. Or if you're interested in talking about optimizing your stress levels. So I'm going to post that right here in the chat. And so if anyone's interested in just doing a quick 30-minute consult, I'm going to offer that to anyone that came to this webinar. I love meeting you all, and hopefully we'll talk again soon. All right. Thank you all.